Dr. Helen Rowe is the Parsons Field Institute ecologist. She worked as the Parsons Field Institute director for a number of years and did wonderful things with this organization before moving to Flagstaff and taking up a position with the Northern Arizona University, but she still works closely with us as a contract ecologist, and we're very, very lucky to have her.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Everybody, can you see my slide here? Here? Thumbs up, anybody? Okay, thank you. All right. So in this talk, I plan to talk a little bit broadly about what happens to all of the valuable data that you collect on our long-term biodiversity monitoring projects, and then dive into some specifics using our most recent analyses as an example. So we have three research priorities areas, and the first one is the one that I'll be talking about, which is essentially our biodiversity conservation priority, and looking at the urban stressors and climate change effects on our biodiversity. So taking a broader view, a study in 2015 showed that worldwide, across all broad groups of plants and animals, biodiversity is in decline. The world is experiencing unprecedented and catastrophic loss of biodiversity, which is largely driven by human influences. The causes of decline are largely from human influences, as you can see as the correlation here of population and extinctions. More specifically, the causes for the crisis are driven by habitat loss, degradation, pollution, invasive species, and exploitation. These factors are exacerbated by climate change, and the extent to which climate change will begin to contribute more to biodiversity declines is widely being studied now, but we have yet to see. One of the things that we can do to protect biodiversity is to protect large contiguous spaces. Protection of the preserve is important because it connects nearly 3 million acres of protected lands, including the McDowells to the east and Tonto National Forest to the north. This large connected landscape is part of the reason why the preserve supports so many species. Species need large spaces in order to persist and thrive. It is not enough to protect the places, but we also need to ensure that those spaces continue to support biodiversity. And so we do that through our monitoring and conservation actions. Through our monitoring, we know that the preserve supports abundant species across many taxa. However, the preserve still faces challenges. The most prominent are the effects of urbanization, including roads and increased visitor use, and climate change. Thus, in our monitoring programs, it is important to study the impacts of those stressors on plants and animals in the preserve. So how do we protect the preserve and the larger region? We know what's in the system and their interactions between those components, and we can document how those changes, how those change over time, and also then dig down to understand better the causes for those changes. So if there are declines, we can then come to management recommendations and action. So these are the different projects we have, and in bold are the ones that we have started making progress in analyzing the data. It's not enough to just get the data, we need to do something with it. And so we are have some work going on these ones in bold, and we will be moving on to the unbolded ones in the future. So those projects help us to track those changes, as I said. And so I'm going to move now into some specifics around most recent analysis that I've been working on, which is the butterfly analysis. As many of you know, Ron Rutowski is our research partner, and I've been working with him and some others on doing this analysis and understanding more about what's happening. So the butterfly counts occur, we have a fall, butterfly counts became part of our monitoring program in 2014. And they're a good species to use as a study species because they're conspicuous and easy to count. You can tell species apart more readily than some other groups, and they're pretty. So it's easier to engage volunteers. And as one butterfly expert said, they give a little bit of grief because butterflies don't like it too cold and they don't like it too hot. And so it gives a very nice window for being able to go out in nice conditions and look for them. So our butterfly counts, we hold one in fall and one which we've been counting since 2014, and then we added another set in the spring 2017, and we have about 15 that participate in each count. We've developed and refined our protocol over time, and we contribute our data to NABA, the North American Butterfly Association. And so we have, so we're looking at, so we took just the preserved data and analyzed that. And I'm also working on other NABA regional sites in Arizona, which I'll talk about in a minute. But where we also came up with a report that will be coming out very soon. We'll be putting it up on our website and sending it out. You can look for it in newsletters. I'm sure we'll announce it there. But so in that report, one of the things that we found, we asked a few questions. So up top, you'll see our question. So are butterfly populations changing over time in the preserve? So that was one of the questions to see specifically, are we seeing declines? So the answer is that although we're seeing variation over years, so these are years, we are seeing variation over time. We are not seeing consistent declines from either our fall counts or our spring counts. So that's good news. And then here, another question is, do areas within the preserve show different trends? Because we have our butterfly counts are held at different sites within the preserve. And so, and these are the different sites. You can see the 6 listed here, and they're in different colors here across our different time. And this is abundance. One way of looking at butterflies is just the number of individuals you see total. And then here's another one, which is richness, which is the number of species that we see. And then this is a combined index, which takes together the number of individuals and the richness and calculates what's called the Shannon Diversity Index. And you can see that the richness and Shannon Diversity Index are pretty similar. But going back to our question is, do they show different trends? And we did not find, when averaged across year, we did not find differences across the different preserve sites. And then our final question for this report was really, how do climate variables drive the annual fluctuation? So this is one way of looking at whether climate change is affecting our butterfly populations. And so what we found here is for the fall butterfly counts across all three of these ways of measuring, it was the previous monsoon that was most important. So that, so for fall, of course, the previous monsoon just happened. And then for the spring counts, it was annual precipitation. So the whole previous year of precipitation mattered most. And then, but winter precipitation wasn't as strong. And so that's really what we came up with. But what about individual species, you might ask? So if you look at this graph, this is sort of a way of seeing how much variation some species have, whereas some species are pretty even across years. So taking from a science paper that came out a couple of years ago, I took out the trends that they're seeing across the West on butterflies. And these are some of the species that showed up in their paper. And we found that half of the species had negative trends, whereas the other half had positive trends in population. So this is the paper that I'm referring to. And it showed in general that butterflies are declining across Western states, which is alarming. And so what do we do about that? So one thing we're going to be doing is we're going to dig down deeper into our data. So we're going to be doing species by species analysis to understand a couple of years later, and only focused on Arizona, are we, and last couple of years have been a little better in terms of rainfall. Are we seeing better trends? So we'll be using some of the same statistical approaches that they used in their paper. And then we're also going to be, we'll also be sort of evaluating those trends. So IUCN is the most globally used standard for assessing threats and species level probability of extinction. And we can compare what we're seeing both with published assessments and with the criteria that IUCN has to help us gauge their regional status. So here are the criteria and threatened categories. And these are linked to numerical thresholds that we can think about when we're thinking about any trends that we start seeing, and bring in larger regional trends as well. And so here's an example also of the queen. So this is the queen butterfly that you saw on a previous slide that was seeing a slightly a decline in populations. But this is an assessment that was an IUCN assessment that was done for this butterfly species. And it's, as you can see here, is common throughout much of its range, but population size estimates and trends are not known. Research across the range of this species is necessary to ensure regional populations are stable and ample quality habitat remains to support the viability of this species. So that's something that we can bring to the table. If we can dig down into what's happening in Arizona across the species that are prevalent here, we can help inform global assessments. So we can say if we're starting to see a real decline in this species, well, number one, we'll look at, okay, what plant species is the queen most closely associated with? What's happening with that plant species? We can also then provide our data. We will figure out who in IUCN is working on their assessments and make sure that they have access to our data and our analysis so that they know. We can also see what's happening in neighboring states if we see really strong declines, because, you know, it's not a bubble. So if a species is widespread, as this one is, we'll want to know if we're seeing declines, are we seeing this on a wider scale as well. So those are different ways that we can think about our data and our analysis to really help that species, not just in the preserve, but broadly. So I think I'm running out of time, but I only have, I think, 3 slides left. So in our next, after butterflies, one of the analyses I'm going to be digging into is working with our partners at the National Phenology Network to work on our phenology data. And so in that, we have our surveys. There needs to be data cleaning, analysis, ID, cause identification of trends, cause for trends, and then linking that to management action. And so this is sort of what I've been explaining in my talk so far. And then the analysis with the National Phenology Network will be focusing on these 2 steps, and we'll be using our data as an example, but that we will also be trying to provide guidance for other organizations to more clearly provide instructions on how they can use their own data. And I want to say, as I'm working with National Phenology Network, I'm working with Teresa Crimmins, the director there, and she's constantly saying, tell your stewards what amazing job they're doing. They use us as a, hold us up as an example of really excellent data and continuous data, because you can't learn and analyze the data without such consistency. So she wanted me to tell everybody and share the thank you for all the great work that you're doing. So I told her this would be our opportunity to do that, one of them. And so so I think this will be help us to provide analysis tools for us to more readily analyze our own data going forward, but also to provide those tools for others. So in summary, we monitor species and species groups in the preserve so that we can detect change and inform effective management and biodiversity protection. We also compare our data with other data sets in the region so that we can understand the bigger picture and not in isolation, since species move and populations are connected. Initiatives like ours are also critical on a global scale for larger assessments and analyses of biodiversity trends that help inform the global diversity framework and international intergovernmental science policy platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services. I want to give thanks to all the stewards for their work in continuing to contribute and participate in surveys. to the butterfly experts who are largely from different organizations. Doug Jensen for his work as steward lead. And then my research partners on this project who are also contributing to the analysis and the report.
There was a question concerning the nature of our certified citizen science program, and that question was whether it is unique to the Conservancy or whether it is statewide. And it is unique to the Conservancy. I can answer that. Other than that, there's a question: what is phenology? How would it be defined?
Yeah, phenology is the cycle of changes that a organism goes through, either in a year or in its life cycle. So for example, for the plant phenology project, it starts out after the winter rains with pretty much the bud burst and the flowers coming out, and the going to seed and dropping seed. So there's, I think, about 6 that we stages that we've identified. And it depends on the exact species that you're talking about as to which ones that we focus on in the phenology project. But yeah, it's the different life stages that it goes through basically to get through reproduction.
One other question. In the preserve, about how many of our 1,000 plus species might be threatened or endangered? Do we have concerns about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that we don't have any threatened or, the threatened and endangered category comes out of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And we don't have necessarily threatened and endangered species, but we do have species that are on other sensitive species lists. And as we work through, next year we're going to be starting work on doing IUCN assessments of our all the species that are on our plant, our flora list. And through that, we may find some species that through that standard criteria are may fall into one of the threatened categories. One of the differences between looking at using IUCN and Fish and Wildlife Service is that Fish and Wildlife Service, a species needs to have kind of a champion to get it on, get it listed, whereas the IUCN criteria are just a standard criteria that are applied to all species. And I see that's my time.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on.
Thank you, Helen, very much. It's really amazing to see how the projects that, citizen scientists at the Conservancy have worked so hard on are having, potential worldwide implications and filling some really critical data gaps regionally and worldwide.